So yesterday we talked about Donald Trump's statements about the terror incident that never was in Sweden. Well, today, or last night, a riot did actually occur in Sweden. Now, this is interesting because Donald Trump had made these statements in Florida 2 days ago, and the internet is freaking the fuck out. So riots actually did erupt in Sweden's capital, the capital.
Stockholm.
Yeah, a little bit north of, no, a little bit, like in a neighborhood, a little bit north of Stockholm in Rinkeby. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's a smaller neighborhood and predominantly has an immigrant population. Now,
very segregated.
yeah, very segregated. And what's really interesting to me is that this is actually one of the neighborhoods that Donald Trump was referring to, or a lot of alt-right people refer to, a lot of anti-Muslim people refer to as the rate of crime going up when they want to instill fear upon Americans and justify a Muslim ban. This is one of the reasons, this is one of the misinformation that they use. Now, what I really want to talk about is how we're covering it, like how American news is covering it, because a friend of mine from Turkey sent it to me, and he's a big Donald Trump supporter, the kid I went to high school with, very weird.
Interesting.
He sent me this, he sent me a Breitbart article, and instantly, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh no, two thoughts came to my mind. One was, oh shit, it's happening. And two was, wait a minute, is it really happening? Because this is a Breitbart article. And that's terrifying, because this is, like, Breitbart is supposed to be a real news organization. Steve Bannon, its founder, is one of Donald Trump's biggest lackeys. Well, not even lackeys. Some say he's actually in charge of he's the real guy behind the guy responsible for the American government, like the Dick Cheney to George W. Bush. So that's even more terrifying. But the fact that when you look at Breitbart's feed and you see a bunch of ridiculous articles, and it's not just partisan, it's more so propaganda, and people can criticize the Young Turks for that too, but we still try to maintain just authenticity and truth through and through in our coverage, whereas Breitbart will just say shit like unsubstantiated claims like Obama is Kenyan.
Yeah.
You know, and that'll be their like main thing. What are you doing? Cut.
You fell out.
Cut for a second. You fucking savage. Okay. Now, the reason why I mentioned this is because I then went forward and looked at other news sources, Washington Post specifically. And what's really interesting, and we'll put these two screenshots side by side on the screen right now, is one is a paragraph from the Washington Post article, and the other one's a paragraph from Breitbart. Now, I'm going to read them back to back, and you tell me which one you think is from which. Sweden's Dagens Nyheter newspaper that confirmed that an officer fired shots with intention to hit a rioter, but did not strike his target. A photographer for the newspaper was attacked by more than a dozen men, and his camera was stolen, but ultimately no one was hurt or even arrested. Now I'm going to read you the other article. The riots, in which cars were set ablaze and shops were looted, resulted in the Stockholm suburb looking like a war zone, according to a journalist who was at the scene. Police retreated to a nearby gas station after being forced to fire a warning shot as a group of around 30 thugs pelted officers with stones, according to Expressen. Our officers were attacked by a number of people, some of them masked, who threw stones. They felt under so much pressure that a shot had to be fired, said police spokesperson Lars Bystorm. In the unrest, and then it goes into detail about what's going on, and the same photographer that the other article detailed as not being hurt, I was hit with a lot of punches and kicks to the body and head and spent the night in hospital, the Dagens Nyheter photographer said. So riots continued into the night, and there was chaos, and it looked like a war zone. Now, this is one picture that two different news organizations are painting. And if you look at the Fox News article, or if you look at the Breitbart article, you will see that there was a conflict, there was a war zone, and it was devastating.
They're painting a different narrative.
And then they instantly take a tangent into, they directly change the narrative into Muslims are terrifying, they are living in your communities, and they will do this in America as well. Now that's Breitbart and Fox News. When you look at Washington Post, on the other hand, they're covering it much differently, and it seems a little bit more objectively because they do talk about the collateral damage, but then not necessarily
they're removing,
immediately pointing the finger at Muslims or saying
and they're
thugs.
removing the emotion from the story. That should be separate.
And we do that too. We cover emotional stories in a very passionate way.
Yeah.
But what we do is commentary. We do op-ed pieces here at the Young Turks and on Pop Trigger, whereas Breitbart is making it seem like they are essentially the Associated Press or Fox News. They're not doing op-eds when they have these written articles. But unfortunately, when you write things like thugs, like that has no place in honest, objective journalism.
They're literally words that are meant to trigger the audience that is reading them to feel a certain way.
Now this is scary. It's scary because my friend who sent me this article quite literally said, there are no truths anymore. There are only opinions and how you frame them. So this is one thing that happened, and two different publishers are covering it in entirely different ways. But the real thing really happened, but unfortunately it's more of like, it's now more so about who has more vocal supporters behind what ideology. Like, so what I'm terrified by now is, the news is really important. The fourth estate is an essential check and balance. So what I'm terrified by now is what happens when everyone is just a partisan mouthpiece, and you're not really covering, even when you're supposed to be covering objective journalism, like things that happened, you're trying to push the administration's narrative. And you can say that MSNBC did this. You can. During the Obama administration, we criticized them. We criticized them for a very long time. So I totally agree with you. But it's terrifying because there's a very real outcome of this.
There's real journalism out there. Unfortunately, people aren't looking for that. They're looking for whatever narratives support their ideology, what they already believe in. That's easier to digest for them, and it makes you feel better because you're like, oh my God, I am right. This is how I feel about a certain thing, and I'm reading it here. That must mean I am right. It's not challenging my perspective.
Yeah, but it just worries me because, and I know you see this too, it's just creating a more, just a massive divide between the public, between these two ideas, specifically on the Islam issue, which is a hot button topic, and it extends far beyond identity politics because it has very real implications on the lives of Muslims that live here, and also presents a very real threat to American lives living here and abroad because it's generating this hatred amongst normal Muslims as well worldwide when you alienate them and you treat them like they are the other, like they're the enemy. And that's all that this is doing. And it's great for the Trump administration because in times of conflict, in times of war, administrations can get away with a lot. They can expand executive powers. The Obama administration and the GWB administration did that.
Yeah.
And we criticize them for it.
It's not a Republican-Democrat thing. They both do it.
It's an American thing.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying because America is shifting into an authoritarian ideal, and Islam will be the common enemy, and that really scares me.
Yeah. My first impulse when I read this story, I was very frustrated with the immigrants in this story before I even had any more information. I was like, God damn it. Why are these guys rioting? Why is all this happening? This is all proving Donald Trump's point.
But it's not new.
It isn't new, and it has nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah,
It has everything to do with this neighborhood. From the more I read, the more information I get. It's a very segregated neighborhood where life is difficult there. Guess what? The same thing happens right here in the United States.
I know.
Whether it's outside of St. Louis or wherever.
But then that's another way, like the Blue Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter narrative is another narrative used by essentially like white middle class Americans to alienate and segregate black people, to point the finger at them, make them responsible for all the things that are happening and use them as the other. So that's domestically, they're doing the exact same thing. They're domestically doing the exact same thing with the anti-immigration concept. They're doing the exact same thing with the Muslim ban. It's like the three main demographics that are non-white is Muslims, blacks, and Latinos. And the Trump administration has identified and shifted the blame directly to them in 3 very different styles, and people don't understand that. And that is creating a bigger divide, especially if you think like they have this really utilitarian motive. And it's easy to paint it in
They
that
don't.
way.
They'd rather just keep the conversation going about the good versus bad of Islam.
Yeah,
And
or the good versus bad about illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Or the good versus bad about like, of course blue lives matter, of course all lives matter. But
And it feels like the critics of immigrants and immigration, they're literally 1 degree away of being like, let's purge all of them. Let's get rid of all of them. Because they're not offering any other type of alternative to how we can solve this situation.
yeah, by the way, another important thing is like, you look at trends when you analyze data, right? You're not supposed to nitpick data points. And overall, there's a downward spiral in crime in those 15 different areas where immigrant-heavy populations reside in Sweden. There's actually a decrease in rapes reported. Now, but we live in an age where if people want to push their narrative, they can easily point to a news organization like Breitbart and find any number of articles that claim otherwise, and then they're like, you're lying. And then it's more of a shouting match.
Yeah.
And the administration still will always have more power in that game because they are essentially creating the news. So, and that's what Donald Trump says all the time, and that is terrifying to me when he's like, they didn't call me for a quote. They didn't call me for a quote. They just talked about it. I am the news. He's like, they're talking about me. You need to come to me if you want information of me. And he's not wrong. But he abuses that power. We've seen him abuse that power when he goes out and talks about a fake terrorist attack that didn't happen in Sweden. His administration abuses that power when they talk about Bowling Green and talk about a massacre that never happened in Kentucky. And people, and there's it resonates with people, and there's still this remnant of that fake information. There's spillover in the populace that still believe that. There are still people, if we polled people right now, we would find that plenty of them think that a massacre did indeed happen in Bowling Green and was committed by Muslims. And that's fucking scary. It's especially scary when you don't know who to trust anymore. When everyone is just pointing the finger at one another, and then the administration has access and has all the resources and has all the power. And that's how you slide into an autocracy. Now, sorry to bum you guys out. Don't forget to smash that like button. I'm Hasan Piker, this is Amir Nakui, and we'll see you next time on Pop Trigger.